So for everybody who's just joined, again, I want to introduce myself. That was Jessica Ayub of the ACLU of Michigan. Many of you already know her. She's our volunteer engagement strategist. My name is Sharon Delente. I'm the voting rights strategist at the ACLU of Michigan. Yes, it seems like everybody has to have the term strategist in their title. I didn't make that decision, but we love it. So I'm so excited to be with you this evening for the second in our three-part voting rights webinar series. I want to acknowledge and warn you all that I have a cold, so I have really tried to distribute the talking tonight as I've handed Jessica the technology tips in the beginning, and we have two great guest speakers tonight that I'm really excited about, and you may also hear me sipping hot tea in the course of the webinar in order to make sure that I don't cough, so we're just going to do our best. So again, if you're just joining us, and you're having any audio problems, remember to click on the test audio button at the bottom of your screen. If you still don't hear anything, turn up your speakers. And if you still don't hear anything, use the dial-in information that came in your registration and which is replicated on the screen here. So before we get started with the program, I want to again thank our great partners in this webinar series, the Campus Voter Project, the League of Women Voters of Michigan, and Voters Not Politicians. We've been collaborating on these webinars in a variety of ways, and we'll continue to do so through our third and final webinar next Wednesday at 7 p.m. And we are, of course, collaborating with these partners and others on the clerk engagement work more broadly. So, as I said on the last webinar, and as you'll hear me say again and again, Promote the Vote Prop 3 was not just about changing the rules. The goal of Promote the Vote was to create a voting system that works for all of us. That was the tagline for Promote the Vote, and it is one that the ACLU certainly, and I'm sure my partners on these webinars support, and the partners in Promote the Vote. So despite significant increases in participation in 2018, as you'll all remember, we had historic turnout both nationally and in Michigan. We still had serious disparities in participation by race and ethnicity in this country. This is some information from the Pew Research Center, and you can see that there are still very different participation rates, but again, based on race and ethnicity. And despite record turnout by young people in 2018, especially here in Michigan, we still have serious disparities in participation by age. Similar disparities exist for voters based on income and education as well. I also have reviewed the census data from 2018, and although I don't have Pew, really beautiful graphics from Pew, I can tell you that those similar disparities based on race and ethnicity and age and income and education exist in Michigan as well. But I thought this was a little bit of a helpful slide in giving a snapshot of how some disparities play out in Michigan. This is a compilation of information from a variety of news sources right after the 2018 election. And as you can see, based on the cities and counties that I have here, there are stark differences between the turnout of our two largest cities and the surrounding county in which those cities sit. I'm a city dweller. I see this turnout advantage of the surrounding county, and I know that that gives the surrounding county a greater political advantage in the public policies that are developed in the state. Likewise, you can see differences between counties. Oakland County has higher turnout than Wayne County. Macomb County has higher turnout than Oakland County, and Kent County has higher than Oakland and Wayne, but not higher than Macomb. All of these differences, I would suggest, have political implications for the policies that the citizens of these various counties seek. So again, to get back, we took an important and necessary step with the passage of Prop 3, but the question now is, what will we do with those rule changes? Will they be utilized to achieve full participation in our democracy? Or will these new voting rights replicate the same disparities in voter participation that have existed for years? If we want to see full participation in our democracy, we need to do voter engagement differently. The effort must be more expansive than ever before and more inclusive. Michigan will never be able to achieve full participation or frankly even reach Minnesota's level of voter participation. Minnesota has the highest voter participation unless we expand the electorate. So what does it mean to expand the electorate? Expanding the electorate is what the wonks or the political operatives, it's their term for just turning out new voters. And to do that, it takes talking to people who have never voted before. It takes talking to people who are not registered. And it takes talking to people and engaging people who the algorithms tell you is unlikely to vote. The changes brought about by Prop 3, discussed in detail in the first webinar, mean that darn near any citizen 18 years of old can register and vote in the state. That message has to travel far and wide to reach those who historically have been excluded from the democratic process. An empowered voter is one who can empower, educate, and engage other citizens in their communities and networks to participate in our democracy. As I said last week, public education and clerk engagement are the two key pieces. Last week we talked about public education, and tonight we're going to talk about clerk engagement. I'll start at the beginning tonight with why clerk engagement matters and what clerks can do. We will hear from our special guest from Grand Rapids about the long history of clerk engagement, and we'll hear from our special guest who will share the perspective of those we wish to engage. The primary responsibility for administering elections in your community is owned by the city and township clerks. Secretary Benson and the staff at the Bureau of Elections have done a tremendous job implementing register anytime and early voting and many of the new rights. They've trained and will continue to train election officials. But from this point forward, the responsibility for administering elections excuse me, with these new rights will fall primarily on Michigan's municipal clerks. And by that, I mean the city and township clerks. With all due respect to my friends, the county clerks, who I love dearly, I'm not talking about them at this time. Many people don't even know that we have both a city and a township clerk and a county clerk, and even fewer people know the difference between those two. City and township clerks, as I said, have primary responsibility for administering elections. County clerks play an important role, but their role involves far less contact with voters. As an example, county clerks print the ballots, but city and township clerks issue the ballots to voters either in an absentee context or on election day, obviously through their poll workers and staff. There are more than 1,500 city and township clerks in Michigan with primary responsibility for administering elections. That means we have a lot of clerk engagement to do. So let's drill down a little bit more on what they can do. Their primary areas of responsibility are listed on the screen. Sorry, I shouldn't say primary. I should say a select list of election responsibilities are on your screen. That includes, of course, voter registration. They maintain the voter registration lists for their city and township. They add new registrants officially to the voter registration list, and they maintain the master cards. They remove voters who have moved away or died. They send notices to voters who have moved, and they send notices about upcoming elections. And under Register Anytime, they'll be responsible for handling all the registration within the last 14 days and on election day. They also obviously handle early voting by absentee ballot. That means that they mail out applications at the request of voters. They may maintain a permanent absentee list. Most in the state do. They process completed applications. They mail absentee ballots, and they set their office hours beyond the minimal hours that are required by law. They also have to manage all the voting equipment. That's the tabulators and the laptops, which are called electronic poll books, and the booths and the secrecy sleeves, and the bags and the seals and all kinds of things that I don't even know all about. They also have to manage poll workers. And this is, I'm sure we'll hear tonight, always a challenge. They have to recruit enough poll workers. They have to figure out how many they need. They have to assess what the turnout is going to be and how many poll workers they need where. They have to assign them to those locations. Some clerks, city and township clerks, handle training, and some do not. Larger jurisdictions are able to do their own training. They have to identify polling locations, and they have to ensure that those locations have all those supplies that we just talked about. And they engage in public education and engagement. They are doing voter registration drives. They're answering questions. So what were the recommendations for expanding access to the ballot that based on my experience and in understanding the promote the vote changes and where could additional capacity and expanding access to the ballot occur? This is the list that we developed because we know that city and township clerks have primary responsibility and that they have areas of discretion. So we came up with this list of suggestions where clerks could increase access to the ballot in 2020. Why this list? Well, number one, it has to be something that's within the discretion of a local city or township clerk. If the law prohibits it, it doesn't go on this list. Second, it needed to be things that would increase access to the ballot. And number three, we intentionally came up with a list that includes at least one thing that every city and township could do. So not every recommendation on this list is appropriate for every community. Different communities have different sizes of voters. They have different geography and distance that voters, they have different demand for one or another type. But on this list, and I'm going to run through it in a second, there is at least one, and I would suggest more than one thing that every city and township could do. So at the top of the list is provide postage paid return envelopes for absentee ballots. Look, the research is if you don't have to go find a stamp, if you just don't happen to have one, or if you're a person who doesn't mail anything and doesn't even really have stamps or know how to get them anymore, which clerks have told me is true for some people, just providing postage paid would get those ballots back faster. Satellite offices is another option. To explain what a satellite office is, Detroit and Lansing have had satellite offices for quite a few years. They're really just a replication of the clerk's office, and it's a replication of the office in a more convenient, perhaps more accessible, more parking, or maybe just another place because there needs to be multiple places. And so it operates just like a clerk's office, where voters can come in and they can register and they can get an absentee ballot and they can submit it. And so it's not super complicated. It's a replication of the clerk's office. Clerks could increase evening and weekend hours for voter registration and early voting. They could establish, and if they did not already have a permanent absentee list, they could establish one. And you'll notice I'm using a different term here. So there's been sort of a move from the term permanent absentee list, and I'll explain in a minute what that is, to automatic absentee ballot application list or an automatic application list. The reason is because of what it is. What this is a list of voters who get an application sent to them for an absentee ballot when each election arises. So again, as elections approach, if you are on the automatic application list, then your city or township clerk automatically sends you an application for you to apply for an absentee ballot. It's not an automatic ballot being sent to you. So that is why there's a desire to sort of be a little more specific with the name there. City and township clerks could establish a secure, convenient absentee ballot drop box. Many have this, but not all have this. What does this mean? It means that if you get off work and you're going by and you want to drop off your ballot at 7 p.m. because you don't get off work by 5 p.m. when the clerk's office closes, that you could securely place it somewhere. Expanding poll worker recruitment, diversifying poll worker recruitment, expanding and diversifying in order to get a new skill set. Those are all things that local clerks could be doing, and very well may need your help in doing. And the final is increase voter registration and outreach and education in the community. So again, this goes from things that are, probably have a significant cost, right? Providing postage paid return envelopes or opening up a replicated office has some costs. We can't pretend that it doesn't. But something like increasing voter education and outreach may have a very, very small cost, or establishing a secure drop box may have a very very low cost. So as I said, these may not all be right for every community, but at least one is right for every community. In addition to these recommendations, of course, it makes sense for anyone who's reaching out to a local clerk to be talking about any persistent challenges or barriers to voting that were specific to that community. So this is a list of issues not driven by any particular problem in any particular community. But as we know, sometimes there are polling locations that have long lines and frequently have long lines. There could be a polling location that is difficult for individuals with disabilities, or a polling location that doesn't have adequate parking. There could be a need for bilingual poll workers in a particular polling location. There could be a need for more resources or materials or booths at a particular location. Community members know the common issues and challenges in their community, and those are also, of course, should be added to this list that are specific to any given city or township. So now I want to invite our first special guest to share about her long history and experience doing clerk engagement work in Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids is in fact the model for this work. Kathy Harris has been a part of the team engaging the Grand Rapids clerk there for more than a decade by my estimate. In fact, Kathy has outlasted many clerks there. If my count is correct, she has been doing this work through at least 3, perhaps 4 different clerks in Grand Rapids. Ms. Harris is the president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute chapter in Grand Rapids. She is the co-founder and lead of Proactive, and that name pretty much sums it up. The group is all about registering and turning out voters in Grand Rapids. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Harris.
Thank you. I had to find my mute button. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to come on and be a part of this webinar. First of all, I'd like to explain our Proactive. Proactive is an acronym for people reaching out, actively coming together, increasing voter empowerment. And as president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which is a senior labor constituency organization, I was wearing at the time about 5 different hats. And so I had to pull it all together because everyone was doing similar things, slightly different, but we had the same mission back in 2000. And so from that point up until now, we've been working Proactive. Proactive started from A. Philip Randolph meeting with some other nonprofit organizations. And one of the main organization was the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And with meeting with them, we started talking about we needed to reach out in the community, and we wanted to come up with something that was common among all of our organizations and something that we needed to do together. So we started Proactive, and we reach out to the African American community and Hispanic community. We looked at the numbers, the low voter turnout areas, and from that, we've identified approximately 26 precincts, and we work those precincts almost every election because they still have the same problem. People move around for whatever reason or just don't vote. And so we wanted to make sure that we build a relationship with those precincts and we get those people out to vote. And so our program is a 3-part series. We start out with registering them to vote. And then we go back and we educate the community or the neighborhoods and precincts on the various issues. And then on election day, the day before and election day, we get them out to the polls. And so over a period of time, we've had over 300 volunteers. And it's just organizations, any nonprofit organization that want to work with us. We found that there's the party organizations, but no one was reaching out to the nonpartisan because everyone was focused on particular parties. And so that's how our focus ended up being on the nonpartisan side. And so we have increased the numbers We are continually registered to vote, and we have built that the reputation that we have with the city, with the community, and with the elected officials because of the work that we have done. And as was mentioned, we have worked with 3 clerks at this point. But the unique part about this is that the first clerk that we had to work with was a part of our organization before she became the city clerk. So she knew what we were up against, and it made it a lot easier for her to understand our needs and was willing to work with us and help us get what we needed to get in order to have a successful election cycle. And from there, now we're working with the new clerk, and we have to start all over with him. But it's very helpful to have that relationship with the clerks, because you never know what you may need and how they can help you out, and you don't want to make any enemies. On election day, we had to call the city clerk. We had to call some of the other elected officials. And so if we didn't have that relationship with them, they would not respond to us the way that they do. It was also mentioned, I don't know if this was mentioned, I know I talked about it in the past with the election commission that we have formed, and that was also with the city clerk, with the city mayor and city commissioners. We formed an election reform committee, and we talked about the various problems that we found. I think I may be bouncing around, but the problems that we found were with the voting process, with the polling sites, with the employees for the city. We put together a report. We told them the problems that we found, and we figured out a way to fix those problems. They moved various polling sites. They've added some to make them barrier free, that those that were needed. They changed employees where they needed to. We made it happen. It was because of the community coming together, because we had that relationship with the community, with the relationship with the city clerk. It was a lot easier, and they understood where we were coming from and why we're doing the things that we were doing. Some of the problems that we faced were the polling sites were overheated, too small, not barrier free, not enough equipment, not enough supplies, employees that had been there forever and they were just mean to the community. We put a nice packet together, and we explained all those different issues, the various problems that we witnessed, and they took care of those problems. But had it not been for the community and the volunteers coming together, the nonprofit organizations coming together, those things would have never happened, because we didn't think that happened in Grand Rapids. We never thought that in Grand Rapids we had the problems that we had. And I always related to the problem that they had in Florida a few years ago when they had the dimple chads, the pregnant chads, and all the problem chads that they had. Well, we had similar chads in Grand Rapids. They were just something else, but it was the same problems, trying to suppress the vote and doing whatever needed to be done to keep our community. And so we have, it's an awesome program that we have. It's just our volunteers coming together. And on top of that, we work closely with the ACLU and some volunteer attorneys and law clerks and law students and those from the various aspects of the legal department on our election protection as well. So that's another part of what we do, is to have that election protection. We watch the polling sites, we watch the voters, we watch the challengers, and then when there's a problem, we have a process to get to our election protection team, and they go out and deal with the problems. And so we have pretty steady flow on election day, from before the polls open to after the polls close. It's I don't know. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to keep talking and taking up other people's time, but I will answer the whatever questions. But again, it's important to have that relationship with your city officials, because if we had not had that relationship with them, we would not have access to the things that we do. I know that our organization is the only nonprofit organization that have been given credentials to sit as a challenger. So there's 3 challengers that are allowed to be at every polling site. The Republican challenger, Democratic challenger, and then there's us as a nonpartisan. And so I felt pretty good once they gave us the approval, because now they look forward to us being there and doing the things that we have done in the past. So I'll stop there and answer whatever questions if anyone has any. I'll turn it back
So,
over to Sharon.
so thank you so much, Ms. Harris. You know, it is a long history of their work, again, and their partnership with the ACLU, that has helped me know so much about how great their work has been. And they've produced numerous reports. Again, they didn't just produce one report after one election. They produce reports after every election. And so it's really extraordinary. I'm going to ask if we can mute everyone. If you're not on mute, if you can go ahead and mute, other than Kathy and myself, that's great. So sorry, I'm not sure if you heard me, but so if you, I just wanted to talk, hold on, someone has a lot of background noise. Kathy, that's not you, right?
I don't think so.
No, you were in a,
No.
okay.
You still hear the noise?
I do, I hear some wind in the background.
That's me. Okay, so, all right. Is that better?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's better. Okay. No, it's okay. There was no wind initially. So, okay. I just want to make sure everyone can hear your answer to the follow-up question. So, Kathy, I just want to remember I had this great conversation with Kathy that was probably around 2014 or 2015. I was working for a different organization doing voting rights work, and she was familiar with the fact that Detroit had these satellite absentee voting locations, or these satellite offices that I mentioned. And I just remember so clearly Kathy saying to me one day, "How do we get one of those?" and I think Kathy, or at least what I thought in that conversation, was that you thought perhaps that there was a rule change. But I said to you, you could have one right now. This is one of those things that's in the discretion of the clerk to do it if they chose, and you can start that conversation. So I want to give you a chance, Kathy, to share about how that effort has gone. Again, if folks remember, I said that was about 2014, 2015 that I think Kathy and I it definitely wasn't 2016 that we had that conversation. And maybe you can provide an update on where that is now.
Okay, well, in the past, I couldn't understand why, number one, Detroit had it, Lansing had it, and Grand Rapids couldn't, being the second largest city. But I was told that you can go to their polling site or their satellite and vote no matter where you're from. So the challenge that we had in Grand Rapids is we were always told, number one, it would cost too much. Number two, they didn't have the staff. They couldn't have the ballots in the various locations because you'd have to have access to, if someone comes to a satellite office, you'd have to have access to any ballot, regardless of what precinct they were in. So
for that,
now,
let me just clarify for everyone, for the city or township, for the city, in this case of Grand Rapids. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the city of Grand Rapids, we have 77 precincts. So the city clerk, they were panicking, wondering how are we going to have 77 ballots at every satellite. So they were trying to figure out how we can make that work, keep the cost down or whatever. And my question was, if Detroit can have almost 500 precincts and they can have these satellite offices, why can't we do it in Grand Rapids with only 77? So now with the new law, the changes are being made, and they are trying to figure out how we can make this happen. They are going to do, they haven't quite worked out all the details yet. And I don't know how many sites they're going to have, but the conversation was had that we are going to be able to do or to have satellite offices. We may have one or two or maybe three. They will be portable. So it depends on where, and I asked the question, if we have an event, can we have the satellite office, or can we have set up for voter registration? Can we set up for voting? And the answer was yes. But we have to look at the scheduling and look at the manpower and all those things that plays into making it happen. But it could happen. And so, and it's all because of the new law that changed, and they have to follow up with whatever we have to follow up based on those changes. And so there's no excuse now why it can't happen. If you can vote, I mean, they're talking about moving down on Market Street at 201 Market. I think the address is having an office there. So my question again is, why can't we move it into the community? Everyone can't make it down to 201 Market. They may not have access to the buses or whatever it takes to get there. If we can have it just say in the churches or one church this Sunday and another church another Sunday. So we've got to work on those particulars. But the bottom line is they're going to be portable satellites, and we are going to make something happen. So
that's so great. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing about that. You know, Kathy, I know that she's been working on that. We've been talking about it. And I think a couple things you can take away, everybody, is that, you know, some things may happen quickly and some things may take time, right? I mean, one of the extraordinary opportunities in Kathy and her group there in Grand Rapids and doing this work sort of year in and year out with the clerk is that even if they weren't able to get it for 1 year, they were able to get, you know, they could continue that conversation. And I think, again, folding in a point that you shared, Kathy, you know, some of these things, even if they had been on part of the conversation, the changes as a result of Prop 3 may make them more attractive to a clerk. So, for example, now Grand Rapids is likely to see a whole lot more people voting absentee. And I've been in their office, and it might not, frankly, be able to handle that demand coming through the building, up the escalators into that building. And so sometimes, you know, it may be that Prop 3 Prop 3's changes coupled with that relationship are now finally creating the opportunity. So thank you so much for that, Kathy. I look forward to seeing pictures of all the voters at that new satellite office or offices, and I'm really excited that you guys kept at it, and it looks like it's going to come for the 2020 election. So thanks for sharing.
Can I just add one more quick thing? We had our souls to the polls, and I know that's something that happens in other cities and states. I know that it's happened in Detroit. I'm not sure if it happened in Lansing, but it's something that we made happen here in Grand Rapids. And we've had it, the first time we had it, we set a record.
I'm going to go ahead and move on. I want to thank you again, Kathy, for sharing the extraordinary work you guys have been doing in Grand Rapids. So, all right, we've talked about what city townships clerks can do. We've talked about the capacity that they have to make voting more accessible. We've talked about specific things that clerks can do before 2020. And we heard about a case study of clerk engagement in Grand Rapids. Now I want to switch gears, and I'm really excited for our next guest. I'm excited for all of our guests, but this one is a sort of a new friend of mine. So I want to invite our second special guest, Tina Barton, to share her perspective. Ms. Barton is the Rochester Hills City Clerk. She's very supportive, I know, of clerk community collaboration, and she really jumped at the opportunity to share her thoughts with us tonight. So who better to tell you how to engage a clerk than an actual clerk? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ms. Barton.
Thank you, Sharon. It's really an honor to be here with everyone, and I want to thank you for all the efforts that you, as well as your organization, are making to educate the voters and with all of the changes that we have. So I appreciate what you're doing also. I'd like to start by saying that I think it's really important for us to recognize that regardless of what organizations that we represent, whether we be a local clerk or an advocacy group, that we recognize that we all want the same thing at the end of election day, and we want a great voter turnout. We want voter participation. I don't know a single clerk out there who wants to put a ton of work in and spend a lot of municipality money to have a 5% turnout. It's really important to us that our voters get out and they vote, and so voter participation is something that, regardless of what organization we're coming from, that we have that in common. And I have found with trying to become more actively engaged with voter advocacy groups over the last year that there has been this mentality of us versus them. And I would hope that as we move forward, especially with all of these changes and the fact that we need each other so much, that we could focus on eliminating those us versus them mentalities that we have and the thought that we are enemies, but instead focus on what we have in common and lay aside the things that we think are separating us as organizations. So as we focus on the issues that we have in common and the ways that we can work towards partnerships, I think that one of the important things that the guest before me had to say was the fact that I heard her say multiple times the word relationships. And I think that the only way that we can move forward and be completely effective is when we are intentional about developing relationships with each other. And one of the things that we have to look at as we're moving forward in these partnerships is a better understanding of where you're coming from and where we're coming from. So please keep in mind that for us as municipal clerks, that the election process for us starts about 3 months prior to an election. So for instance, for an August election, I've already started laying the groundwork, filling out all of my required paperwork, making sure that ballots are what I want them to be with the different precincts, how they're laid out. Everything is all set, and that's all being done in May for an August election. So the election process for us is about a 3-month election process, getting that going. And so it's a very long time that takes for us to do just one election. I have an election in August, and I can tell you that I am on the election train right now, from now until it pulls into the station in December of 2020. So elections for me will not stop from now until we reach December 2020. I have an August, I have a November, then we have a March, and then an August and a November. So this cycle will be ongoing for me for about the next year and a half. But not only are we looking at those things 3 months in advance, we're establishing our polling locations. We have deadlines and things that are required by law that we meet by certain deadlines. We have budgets for our elections that are set months in advance of how we're going to handle things. We're also dealing with last minute changes of precincts. The school district's calling us, telling us that their schools are under construction and we have to find new polling locations. And all of that added, coupled with the fact that we're trying to do public education and communication plans as to how do we let all the voters know that their precinct has moved, and how do we let all the voters know that there is no reason absentee, even though it seems for us who are engaged in the process that we're hearing it talked about a lot. For the average person, they may not even understand that that's an option yet. So clerk engagement and that relationships, they need to start early because those are ongoing trusts that can be built. And so you can build the relationship and trust to have impact, and that will have impact on the access to the ballot in your community, which again is the commonality that we all share. I think it's important to point out that I feel like we're stronger together, that we're way more impactful when we're on the same page. We each have different resources. Your advocacy group has different resources. My city has different resources, even than the city next to me. And we all have different approaches to this. But what we all have is the same target audience, and that's voters. So I feel like it's really important that if we bind together our efforts, that we can make that great impact. And it's really important as we're doing this, that we're all using the same terminology as we're reaching out to the voters to try and educate them. I hope that you would also accept that out of the over 1,500 clerks across the state of Michigan, we're very decentralized in the state of Michigan, which makes us unique to the country. That you have to accept that not all clerks are operating with the same staffing levels. We don't all have the same internal support within our communities. We don't all have the same budgets nor the same technology at our fingertips. So the implementation and the constituent communication can be a struggle for some clerks more than others. And this emphasizes the need for us all to be working together and all to be using the same terminology with the same goal. So many changes have been made over this year with all of the changes that were brought about by Proposal 3. And those changes have been coming at clerks fast and furious over the last several months, and we're trying to keep up with them. We're learning how the process is that the state wants us to do, what forms they want us to use, how we're supposed to be going about things. So what I would ask you is, if you see that something is lacking, say on your clerk's website, if you haven't heard yet from your clerk out in your community of what some of the changes are, please take the time to give a courtesy call to your clerk if you find something that is missing, or if you have questions about a process and feel that we can do something better than what we're doing. Please don't make assumptions that we're coming from a bad place and we just don't want to do it. I think we also have to recognize too that clerks are not one-sided in their jobs. So outside of doing elections, I oversee things like vital stats. I oversee cemeteries. I process liquor licensing. I do solicitation. We handle city council. We handle budgets. Just this year alone, I've already processed nearly 250 FOIA requests just in my department. So it is quite possible that in all of the changes that we have going on, and while I'm trying to process an election, I'm also trying to determine, do I need to buy a new columbarium for my cemetery? that I might possibly could have forgotten, or something simply slipped by me that it didn't get put on my website or got put on there with terminology that could have been better than what it was. So please give us a courtesy call, reach out to us. We are human and we want to get this right just as much as you want us to get it right. So clerks have critical needs that the community can help with. Every clerk I know needs poll workers. For an example, in a presidential election in the city of Rochester Hills, I'm going to hire a minimum of 300 people for that election. Keep that in mind, 300 people. That's way more than some small businesses have as employees. I have to find these people, I have to hire them, I have to train them, and I have to prep them on the election process for that one election. It is never the same set of people from each election to each election. You will have those who hang in there and they tough it out and they work every single election. But understand this is an ongoing process for us of hiring people and continually recruiting, and we're trying to be as creative as we can be. The other thing that I would ask is that if you are someone who is typically a poll challenger, I challenge you to be a poll worker. If you are the poll worker, you can ensure that every voter is being treated exactly the way they're supposed to be treated, and every process is being done exactly the way it's being done. It should be done. So I challenge you, if you're typically a poll challenger, become a poll worker because we need you. And to be a poll worker, you just need to be registered as a registered voter in the state of Michigan. You can go anywhere to be a poll worker within our state. And so you don't have to live in Oakland County or live in Rochester Hills to be a poll worker for Rochester Hills, for instance. So I'll say it again, and the one thing I can't emphasize enough is how important relationships are. And I teach a communication class to a lot of groups, and one of the slides that I use is a quote that Michelle Obama gave when she said, "It's harder to hate up close." And I think in this us versus them mentality that sometimes advocacy groups and clerk's office can get in with each other, that if we establish these relationships, it's so much harder for me to be critical of you or to make assumptions about you or to assume that you're contacting me from a worst case scenario if I have an established relationship with you. Because I don't just know you as an advocate for whatever group. I know you as Sharon, and Sharon, that you're my friend, and I can reach out to you and I can have a civil conversation with you. And so I think it's really important as we move forward that we put an extreme focus on the relationships that we have and the unity and the strength and the power in the unity that we have as we move forward. So thank you, Sharon, for this little bit of time. I, again, appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Tina. Thank you for sharing your perspective with us. I have a few questions that I wanted to ask you. These are common questions that I get, and since we have you, I wanted to let you kind of answer them.
Sure.
My first question is, can you tell us about a time when community members weren't necessarily maybe coordinated among themselves, or they weren't coordinated with you, and sort of what that ended up, what was the result of that in the community as a result of that lack of coordination?
Sure. So one example I'll give is with the last election, one of the political parties took it upon themselves to send out absentee ballot requests that looked similar to those that would be coming from the local community. They also included the local community clerk's name on the request, so it made it look even more official than what it was. We had no idea as clerks that this happened, and I started getting phone calls from my constituents within the city of Rochester Hills that were extremely upset and very confused about the fact that they were receiving an absentee ballot request from me, their local clerk, when they had already been issued an absentee ballot and we had already received it. And they then immediately felt like there was some sort of fraud going on. Someone was trying to get extra ballots, who was applying for a ballot in their name. So it caused a ton of confusion. It caused for a lot of people to become even more suspicious about a process than what they already are, which I think then leads to voter suppression, to be honest with you. When people don't have confidence in a process, then I think they don't partake in it. And so that is just a little scenario that can come to my mind right away of something that happened just this last election that was extremely frustrating for us. But I'd also like to say on a positive, because I always like to take a negative and make a positive, is that an example of when it really worked right was this last school year. I was contacted by the Rochester School District, and we met with them, and we've always held high school voter registrations, but we would go during lunch hour, and we would get maybe 10 or 20 registrations for a lunch hour. In February of this year, the Rochester School District made concerted efforts to meet with me and to develop a plan on how we were going to organize voter registration drives within their high schools this year. I, in turn, reached out to some local clerks in our community. I saw one of them is on the call. I see a lot of Oakland County clerks on the call, so thank you for joining us. But I reached out to them, I reached out to our county clerk, and I reached out to Secretary Benson. And with all of our concerted efforts, everything that we did, we registered just under 500 high school students in the month of May alone, just in the Rochester School District. That's how it goes right. And the prior example I gave you is how it goes wrong.
Thank you, Tina. That's really helpful, and I really appreciate your, showing both how collaboration can produce extraordinary results and how sometimes without as much collaboration it can create challenges. And those challenges, I think it's really appropriate for you to point that out, and I try to do the same. The challenges that can result when we don't do enough coordination can not only be for you, but for the voters. And that's something we're all trying to avoid. So that's why it's so important. So here's a little bit of a harder question.
Okay.
And it's one, frankly, that some of our citizen activists have already asked me. So I've been doing clerk engagement for a while, and I've been told no many, many, many times by many, many clerks, and yet I'm still doing this work. So when folks are meeting with their clerk and they're asking, let's say, for, additional evening hours or whatever they're asking for, what would you say to citizen activists? What should they do, or what should they think about when they hear no from a clerk?
Well, I think number one, I'm always willing to hear people out. So when people come to me with ideas, I think, clerks and advocates both have to be willing to hear the other person out. I think then once we've heard each other out, we have to discuss the challenges, the benefits, and the obstacles that we face by trying to get to whatever end result it is that we're looking for. And then we have to determine, is there a way to get to yes that both sides can agree upon and that the law aligns with and that we have budget for? For example, this was something that a voter who is an election worker actually said, we have these really long lines at precincts. It would be really nice if you would put QR codes at the front of the precinct and people can just scan the QR code and get a sample ballot. And I'm like, that's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We can do that. That can help with the lines. People can look at their ballot as they're waiting in a line. So that was an idea that someone brought up, and I'm like, I pounced on it. We did it, and we've been doing it for the last few elections, and we have found it to be successful. And so I'm very open to ideas. Again, we all want the same thing here, and I think that we just have to hear each other out and determine, how do we get to yes, if possible? What are those obstacles, and what can we do to remove those obstacles, or at least find something that maybe meets midway that we can both agree upon?
Thank you, Tina. Thank you so much. I mean, I think, as I said, I've been told no many times. I share your, your suggestions of what to do, but I think it's helpful not only for folks to hear it from me as an advocate, but from a clerk, that would be, a professional and a productive way to respond, to try and seek out what are those, what are those points of collaboration. So thank you so much for joining us and giving us this perspective of a city clerk. I have never had the opportunity to collaborate this closely on a training with a clerk. So I really, hopefully, I'm so excited, and thank you for being willing to do it. And hopefully we can continue this type of close collaboration among clerks and advocates. So thank you again.
Absolutely, thank you.
So everybody on the call, you've heard from a clerk, you've heard from a community leader, you've heard too much from me, you heard me have a coughing fit. It's been a very exciting evening. So we want to see now who wants to be a part of this important work. we want to know who wants to be engaged in clerk engagement or is already engaged in clerk engagement. And so what I want to ask you to do right now is to either type into your chat box, yes, I can, if you are willing to do clerk engagement. Again, if you're willing to do clerk engagement, type into the chat box, yes, I can. We can obviously have we're able to capture the chat box so we know who said, yes, I can. If you are on the phone or you'd rather, you could also send us an email at that email that I shared with you last week, votingrights@aclumich.org. And again, just include the subject line, yes, I can. That email again is voting rights, plural with an S on the end there, at aclumich.org, and include the subject, yes, I can. This will allow us to know who's interested in doing this clerk engagement work with us going forward. So thank you very much for stepping up and being willing to do that. So the next webinar is all about organizing your team, the third and final webinar. But before we end tonight, I want to outline the first 2 steps to engaging with your clerk. It's just kind of a summary or really a distillation of what we've talked about. And I also want to describe what I call the full arc of clerk engagement. And you really heard it very much, I think, in Kathy Harris's describing sort of what happens over the very long term of doing clerk engagement. Let's see if I can get my PowerPoint to go one more. There we go. Okay. So the full arc of clerk engagement, what do I mean by that? You know, what we've talked about so far are, you know, potential changes in advance of the 2020 election. Tina Barton explained sort of the need that clerks do planning sort of far in advance. That's why we're having this conversation in advance. If you want to try and influence the election administration in your community, you need to build that relationship and have that conversation early. But what is, there's a part of this and there's a piece of this clerk engagement work that I haven't necessarily discussed yet tonight that I want to make sure folks understand. And it was something that Kathy mentioned. Kathy mentioned that her relationship and that long work that they've done year in and year out, you know, before elections, after elections, meant that on election day, Kathy and her team is able to collaborate and reach out to the clerk and solve problems that are happening on election day. So the full arc of this work is, you know, working right now to solve problems in advance of election day. That's what I describe as collaborating to proactively solve challenges well ahead of the election. These are challenges that the clerk may be bringing up or the community. Again, poll workers is a challenge for clerks and frankly for the community as well, because if you don't have enough poll workers, you cannot adequately deliver on the election. But also the full arc is that when you build those relationships with your local clerk, you have a mechanism and a method for solving really, you know, very serious and critical problems if they should arise on election day. So that is the full arc of clerk engagement and sort of what the pot of gold at the end of this partnership and this relationship building. And the first 2 steps look almost identical in their terminology. It's build your partnership with your team and build your partnership with your clerk. So building your team is so important because depending on where you live, they may be very well, they're probably or maybe organizations or individuals who have relationships with the clerk already. For example, the League of Women Voters, I know that there are some League of Women Voters members on, and I'm happy to see you. They have frankly been meeting with clerks in this state probably since before I was born. You want to reach out and see who else is doing this work, and you want to join forces with them, and that's building your team. The second task is to start the dialogue with the clerk. It's to build that partnership with your clerk. And we've talked about that a lot tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and move to our wrap up because I also see that it's 8:05. I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica for a few final reminders before we jump off the call tonight.
Thank you all again so much for joining us tonight. We are very excited for our third and final webinar, which will be next Wednesday at 7 p.m. And that will be all about organizing your team to go and meet with your clerk. So you can do that by visiting the same link you used to register for tonight's webinar and select July 24th from the drop-down menu. We would love to have you spread the word about this webinar. Folks can join the third webinar, even if they missed the first two. After tonight, we'll send you an email with this session recorded and a reminder to register for the final webinar. Again, you can view all of those resources at aclumich.org/voting. Again, that's aclumich.org/voting. And anyone who missed tonight's webinar or the one last week can view those recordings and the slideshows. A huge thanks to our guests, Tina Barton and Kathy Harris, and a huge, huge thanks to our partners who helped us put this on. Campus Voter Project, the League of Women Voters of Michigan, and Voters Not Politicians. And finally, thank you all so much for joining tonight and your commitment to ensuring that we have a voting system that works for all. We're looking forward to talking to you all next Wednesday at 7.